Welcome to Candyman, a podcast that is not about the horror series Candyman. So if you tuned in for that, tune away. Sorry about that, everybody. Go look at a mirror.
Stick around. We're going to talk about Candyman adjacent things like candy, and we're men, obviously.
Oh, and in fact, what we're going to be talking about is Sweet Tooth, the new show on Netflix based on the comic book by Jeff Lemire. This is the preview episode of the podcast. And what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the show, each episode of the show, and we're also going to be reviewing a piece of candy. But for this first episode, I think to give you some ground level understanding of who we are, we have been hosting Comic Book Club, a live show and podcast for well over a decade at this point. We do that every Tuesday. We've reviewed thousands of comic books at this point, interviewed Jeff Lemire many times in the past as well, and are huge fans of Sweet Tooth. I think we talked about pretty much every issue on the live show.
Yes.
Really loved it, and very excited about the show coming to Netflix. Before we get too into it, and again, this is the preview episode, so we're just going to kind of talk broad strokes, what we're looking forward to with the show. And before we get into it with the actual recap, Pete, take it away.
All right. Well, I have some questions about this show. Some things I'm worried about.
About this podcast.
This podcast or this Sweet podcast. Tooth, the show on Netflix?
The show on Netflix.
Before we get to the show on Netflix, we should probably talk about experiences with the comic book and thoughts about it, particularly if anybody has not read it before. Now, some basic information here, if you don't know. It was a Vertigo comic book. It was published from September 2009 to August 2021 over the course of 46 issues. Recently, there was a 6-issue sequel called Sweet Tooth Return that came out from 2020 to 2021 before it became the TV series, but it was all written and drawn and created by this guy, Jeff Lemire, who is awesome. Justin, I'm going to go to you. What's your takeaway from the comic book? What's the big thing you remember about it?
I mean, I love the comic. It's got such a distinct art style that Jeff Lemire does, where it, to describe it, I feel like it's sort of sketchy, sort of watercolor-y, but really it's so endearing. It's almost childlike in the way it's drawn, and that really helps because so much of the comic book is from the perspective of the main character, Gus, this kid in this post-apocalyptic world who is a hybrid. He has some deer qualities, tiny antlers, and little tiny deer ears.
You're absolutely right. The thing that's interesting about it is that the characters, the way that Lemire draws them is they should be ugly in a certain way, like the way that he sketches them, the way that he draws them out, but they are very sweet. They are cute is probably a little too strong, but they immediately draw you in the way they look. It feels like this children's book that is more elaborate, definitely very dark, and the tone of this book in particular is very fairy tale-like, not least of all because you have these hybrid animal children wandering around that almost softens the blow of seeing something that is a absolutely gruesome viral pandemic. Pete, what's your big takeaway from the comic?
All right. Well, first off, love the comic. Jeff Lemire is creepy and adorable in all the right ways, and I feel like it's a great vehicle for him and his art and storytelling. We all really love the comic, but what I'm worried about with the show is why the fuck is it not animated? You have this amazing art style. You're going to have are you going to put like staples in a kid's head for antlers? Like, what are we doing to babies? And I'm just like, why wouldn't we just animate it? And that way we're kind of brought into this world instead of have it live action. Like, I just, I'm a little confused. I'm worried because like, I love the comic book very much that I'm worried that what I'm going to see is going to be so different. It's going to feel nothing like the comic book.
I know they would, but to animate it, Pete, they would have to lay children down and just trace them, right? And like that,
I don't know,
very time consuming.
And where are they going to get all the animal children? That's a tough ask in Hollywood today.
That's right. Just like stapling antlers to a child, which is the other thing you pitched, if I remember correctly.
Well, as we are transitioning into talking about the show here, this is something that they've been working on for a very long time at this point. It was actually originally supposed to go to Hulu before it moved to Netflix. Very similar pattern to another fave of ours, Lock and Key, that also jumped around to a bunch of different networks before ending up at Netflix for its live action adaptation. We do another podcast called Lock and Key Unlocked, and Pete, you expressed a similar reservation there because we love Gabriel Rodriguez's art, but I think ultimately you came around and understood that the show was a different and very much its own thing. That certainly is my hope with Sweet Tooth as well, based on the previews and everything, and the fact that you have Robert Downey Jr. and Susan Downey producing and behind it. That's some primo talent behind the camera.
You got Iron Man on board. You got Iron Man on board, Pete. You should be loving this.
To Iron Man, I think, he's great, but like, what are you going to be doing to these babies? What are you going to do to these babies?
What are you talking about?
How are you going to have a baby with antlers on its head and it not be child abuse? I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they got away with it with that baby Yoda, and I can't believe no one's busted that Mandalorian yet for all those that ear stapling on that kid.
Exactly. Like, I don't know whose babies they're using, but I hope they're very compensated because it seems like a danger.
Yeah, I also am very worried that Netflix wasn't paying the baby actors. That's my primary concern about the show. Thanks for bringing that up, Pete. That seems definitely legit. Just to talk about some of the actors in here, there's also a really great cast.
Oh my God,
we have, I think it's a newcomer, Christian Convery is playing Gus, the main character. You got Nonzo Anozie as Tommy Jeopard. We won't talk too much about that part, even though obviously we know kind of what's coming with a lot of these characters. You also got Will Forte as Gus's father, which is very exciting. Neil Sandilands, which fans of The Flash might know. He was the thinker, the villain in, I want to say, season 4 or 5.
Super endearing, and that's hugely important. Like this, you ride with Gus in this in the comic book series, and we're going to have to. I feel like he's alone a lot in the comic and struggling. Like this kid looks like he's going to play the part well, and it's a hard part.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how they pull that all off, as well as the effects, of course. It's possible that the animal kids could look pretty dinky in the show, potentially, though, like you said, Gus looks pretty good. Dinky, yes, that's a technical term I learned in film school. But it looks good for the previews, so that's exciting. As long as they nail the tone correctly and get that sense of Jeff Lemire's comic books, I'm going to be very happy about it.
I'm also, Will Forte is hysterical, but I don't remember the father having a lot of funny moments. So this ought to be interesting. I mean, obviously comedians can be real actors as well. I'm not taking anything away from Will Forte, but
man, you've been dunking on Iron Man. You've been dunking on Will Forte this whole podcast.
This is a preview. I'm
babies.
Sharing
You've been dunking on babies.
I'm sharing my concerns. I'm sharing.
You've been dunking on
concerns.
babies in real life, which is the only people you can dunk over. Let me say, I just wish, when it comes to Will Forte, I just wish he had some experience playing in a post-apocalyptic world.
Yeah, that would be great. They should have asked him that on his resume.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of thing where you're just the only dude out there? We think the only dude for a long time?
Just let us know. Just phone us back and let us know. Call me on my Iron Man suit that I'm in all the time.
100%.
Before we wrap up here, and usual episodes will be a lot longer. Yes, Justin.
We have to talk about the most important, or the second most important thing.
Exactly.
We are going to be sampling candy each episode. We are the Candyman. Mm-hmm. And what do we say? We're going to do, we're coming out with a huge hitter for the first episode, Snickers.
Huge. We're going to talk about, I can't believe this. This is going to break the internet, I think. We're going to talk about the first episode of Sweet Tooth and review Snickers, which I think you're going to be pretty surprised what we have to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, I haven't eaten candy bars for real in years. Oh, yeah. I just sort of don't eat.
Look at Mr. Health over here.
Here's the thing, I don't have a sweet tooth. And so that's why this series is especially difficult.
All right, we'll pivot to salads. How about that?
Yeah.
Now, that's a thing I can get on board with.
You're a classically trained actor. You can't pretend to eat a Snickers.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to eat a salad, and I'm going to review a Snickers. Wow. Based on it. That's acting right there.
Very leafy, the Snickers.
Yeah, the tomatoes really pop in this checks notes Snickers bar.
All right, folks, we're going to get the feeds all set up for this, so definitely check that out there under Candyman, a Sweet Tooth podcast. Bunch of other places you can check us out.
Candyman, a Sweet Tooth podcast.
Checks all the boxes.
That's
not a podcast about the horror movie, so please don't be confused.
Yeah, we should probably actually specify that in the name. Candyman, a podcast about Sweet Tooth, not the horror movie Candyman, FYI.
Yep, that's good branding. as far as I know.
I agree. You can check out our live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Crowdcast and YouTube. Come talk to us about Sweet Tooth. We would love to know what you are thinking about the show. Soon we'll have the feeds set up. Like I said, you can check them out there. Until then, at Comic Book Live on Twitter, comicbookclublive.com for this podcast and more. Until next time, stay sweet, you sweeties.
Oh, my God.
You always want people to stay something.
Oh, okay. How about should we be
salty
like Candyman? Candyman.
The Candyman can.